He drove her home. He watched her walk inside. He waited until the garage door rolled shut. And then he left. That is the story Tommaso Cioni told investigators. That is the story he has maintained from the very first moment law enforcement came knocking. A quiet evening, a routine drop-off. A son-in-law doing what sons-in-law do. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth remembering. Just an ordinary Thursday night in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. Except that 4 hours later, at 1:47 in the morning, a masked figure walked up to the front porch of that same house, looked directly into the doorbell camera, and manually killed the feed. And Nancy Guthrie was never seen again. Now here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. What you are about to hear is not speculation. It is not forum theory. And it is not the kind of breathless rumor that spreads across social media before anyone has actually looked at the evidence. Every detail in this investigation comes directly from official Pima County Sheriff's Department records, verified FBI press releases, confirmed forensic timeline documentation, and federal investigation files. And when you place those details side by side in the correct order, without leaving anything out, the image that forms is one the mainstream news cycle never had the patience, or perhaps the courage, to show you in full. So, here it is, in full. It is February 1st, 2026. The Catalina foothills sit at the northern edge of Tucson, pressed up against the base of the Santa Catalina Mountains. The houses here are set well back from the road. Wide lots, high walls. The kind of neighborhood where a car idling on the street for too long would be noticed by morning. It is a place designed to feel untouchable, safe. The kind of quiet that takes decades to build and assumes it will never be disturbed. At 1:47 a.m., it is disturbed. A figure appears on the doorbell camera footage of a single-story home in the foothills. Male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. Average build. He is wearing a ski mask. He has layered multiple heavy garments over one another. A silhouette deliberately thickened, artificially bulked up, designed to obscure and deceive. On his back, a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. In the front waistband of his pants, pushed in loose with no holster, a firearm sits at an awkward angle against his body. He does not pause. He does not look over his shoulder. And he walks directly to the camera, stares into the lens, and disconnects it. Not a glitch. Not a power failure. A deliberate act. The feed dies. The porch goes dark. And whatever happens next happens in complete silence, completely unseen, with no recording device left running anywhere on that property. Then 41 minutes pass. 41 minutes of nothing. No screaming. No sirens. No lights coming on in neighboring windows. No dogs. Just the desert quiet pressing in from every direction, while inside that house, something was happening that this investigation has never been able to fully account for. And here is where Tommaso Cioni becomes the center of this story. Not because he has been charged with anything, not because investigators have publicly named him as a suspect, but because the forensic record of this case, the timestamps, the digital evidence, the behavioral analysis of that camera footage, the structure of the ransom demands, the biological traces recovered from the front entrance, every single thread, when you pull it far enough, leads back to the same place. Back to the last person who saw Nancy Guthrie alive. Back to the man who drove her home, waited for the garage door to close, and left. We are going to walk through this evidence piece by piece. We are going to show you 5 forensic anomalies, 5 specific, documented, confirmed details that the professional kidnapping narrative cannot explain. And by the time we reach the fifth one, I promise you this. The story you were sold in those first 72 hours of headlines will not be recognizable anymore. But before we get there, if you are new to this channel, welcome to the Case Files Collective. And what we do here is not summarize. We do not traffic in rumor or reach for the most dramatic interpretation of incomplete information. We go into the files, we sit with the forensic evidence, we follow the digital trail wherever it actually leads. Every case we cover is built on verified documentation, and every conclusion we draw is grounded in what that documentation genuinely says. Nothing more, nothing less. If that is the kind of investigation you came here for, hit subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. New cases drop every single week, and this community shows up for every one of them. Now stay with me, because this is where the case begins. And it begins with Tommaso Cioni. On the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie spent time at the home of her daughter, Annie, and Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni. This was not an unusual arrangement. Tommaso is an AP biology teacher at Basis Oro Valley in Tucson, a school where he has worked for over 15 years. He is Italian-born, well-educated, the kind of man whose colleagues describe him as measured, calm, and deliberate. He had been married to Annie Guthrie for years. He was, by every surface reading of his life, a steady presence in this family, an attentive son-in-law, a man with no visible reason to be anything else. That evening, the three of them, Nancy, Annie, and Tommaso, spent time together at the Cioni home. The specifics of their conversation, what was said, what the mood was, whether anything felt different that night, none of that is confirmed in the public record. What is confirmed, with forensic precision, is what happened when Nancy was ready to leave. At 9:48 p.m., Tommaso Cioni drove his mother-in-law back to her home in the Catalina foothills. He pulled up to the house. He confirmed she was inside. At exactly 9:50 p.m., the garage door rolled down. The driveway went still. The street went quiet. Tommaso Cioni drove away. And that moment, 9:50 p.m., on January 31st, 2026, garage door closing, taillights disappearing down the road, is the last confirmed moment Nancy Guthrie was safe inside her own home. Now, here is the forensic detail that makes everything that comes after it so significant. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She was mentally sharp. She was alert. She was, by every account, a woman who was fully present and engaged in her life right up until the moment she vanished. But physically, her situation was fragile in ways that matter enormously to this investigation. And she had significant mobility limitations. She depended on daily cardiac medication, and investigators confirmed publicly that missing more than 24 hours of that medication could produce a life-threatening medical crisis. She wore a pacemaker, a small implanted device that kept the electrical rhythm of her heart stable. That pacemaker was connected, via Bluetooth, to a monitoring application on her iPhone. The phone stayed on her nightstand at night. As long as Nancy remained within Bluetooth range of that phone, in any room, anywhere inside that house, the connection between device and pacemaker stayed active. The app logged her cardiac data in real time, and the precise moment Nancy moved far enough from that phone for the Bluetooth signal to break. The app recorded it. Time-stamped. Exact. Irrefutable. But according to the forensic analysis of that device, the Bluetooth connection between Nancy's pacemaker and her iPhone severed at 2:28 a.m. The camera was killed at 1:47 a.m. That is a gap of 41 minutes. On the morning of February 1st, a member of Nancy's church congregation noticed she had not appeared for her scheduled live stream service. The family was contacted. Annie and her brother Cameron arrived at the house. They went inside. They found her phone. They found her personal belongings. They did not find her. At approximately noon, they called 911. What Pima County Sheriff's deputies found when they entered that residence caused the case to escalate within hours. The word homicide entered the investigation by the following morning. The FBI was called in. U.S. Customs and Border Protection deployed tracking units. And the case went federal. And standing at the center of it all, as the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie alive, as the man who dropped her off 4 hours before that camera went dark, was Tommaso Cioni. Ask yourself this. You are an investigator. You are standing in that house. The forensic team has just handed you the timestamp from the pacemaker app. The camera footage is gone, manually removed. The 41-minute gap sits in front of you like a locked room with no key. And you know, with complete certainty, who the last person was to see this woman alive. Where do you look first? Because federal investigators looked there too. And what they found when they did, coming up next. There is a particular kind of woman who builds a life so quietly, so consistently, that the people around her forget to measure it. And they just live inside it. They take it for granted the way you take for granted the walls of a house, never thinking about what holds them up until the day something threatens to bring them down. Nancy Guthrie was that kind of woman. She was 84 years old. She lived alone in a carefully kept single-story home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, a neighborhood pressed against the base of the Santa Catalina Mountains, where the air is dry and the evenings carry a particular stillness that people who have lived there for decades learn to depend on. Nancy had built her life in that kind of stillness. She was not a woman defined by noise or spectacle. She was defined by presence, by routine, by the quiet architecture of a life that had been constructed carefully and deliberately over 8 decades. She had 3 children. Her eldest daughter is Savannah Guthrie, the NBC Today Show co-anchor whose face has been a fixture of American morning television for years. Her daughter Annie Guthrie is a poet, a jeweler, and a former marketing director. And that routine is not a sentimental detail. That routine is forensic evidence. Because the moment Nancy Guthrie failed to show up for her scheduled church live stream on the morning of February 1st, 2026, the alarm was raised. Not by a security system, not by a neighbor, by the absence of a pattern. The silence where a familiar presence should have been. And in this investigation, that silence would turn out to be the first signal that something had gone catastrophically wrong inside that house. Now, let us talk about the Catalina foothills home itself. Because the physical geography of where Nancy lived matters to this case in ways that investigators have been careful about. The foothills sit at elevation. The lots are large. The homes are set back. The streets are quiet by design. And it is not the kind of neighborhood where strangers wander in and out unnoticed. It is not the kind of neighborhood where a car parked on the street at 2 in the morning goes unremarked. This is a community of people who notice things, which makes the silence of that night all the more significant. Nobody noticed anything. No neighbor reported a strange vehicle. No dog disturbance was recorded. No lights came on in nearby homes. The street cameras and residential surveillance systems in the surrounding area captured nothing definitive. For a neighborhood built on visibility and awareness, the night of January 31st into February first produced an almost complete absence of external evidence. Whatever happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home that night was contained, controlled, and invisible to the world outside her front door. And that tells investigators something. Because that level of containment does not happen by accident. It requires either extraordinary luck or specific knowledge of the environment. knowledge of the layout, knowledge of the neighborhood's rhythms, knowledge of where the cameras were, which streets the Ring doorbells covered, which angles the neighbor's motion sensors swept. The kind of knowledge a stranger researches in advance, or the kind of knowledge a family member already has. Now, here is where you need to understand the full picture of Nancy's physical situation, because it is central to what the forensic evidence says happened inside that house. At 84, Nancy was not frail in the way the word is sometimes used dismissively. She was cognitively present. She was sharp. People who knew her describe a woman who was engaged, then opinionated, and very much aware of what was happening around her. But her body told a different story. She had documented mobility limitations that affected how she moved through her own home. She required daily cardiac medication, a specific pharmaceutical regimen that her heart function depended on. Investigators confirmed publicly that a gap of more than 24 hours without that medication could escalate rapidly into a medical emergency. And she wore a pacemaker. That pacemaker, that small implanted device keeping the electrical rhythm of her heart in its correct pattern, was connected via Bluetooth to a monitoring application on her iPhone. The phone sat on her nightstand, within arm's reach, every single night. As long as Nancy was inside that house, within the standard Bluetooth range of approximately 30 feet, the signal between the pacemaker and the phone remained active. The application logged her cardiac data continuously, in real time, without interruption. The moment that connection broke, the moment Nancy was moved beyond the range of that phone, the application recorded it. A timestamp, precise to the second, automatically stored in the device's data log. That timestamp is 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, 2026. The doorbell camera was killed at 1:47 a.m. 41 minutes separate those two numbers. And inside those 41 minutes, inside that house, with an 84-year-old woman who could not run, could not fight, and whose absence from a morning church service would be the thing that finally raised the alarm. Something happened that this investigation is still, as of today, working to fully prove. Now here is the detail about Nancy's life that the news cycle picked up and then immediately moved past without understanding its significance. Her daughter Annie was not just a visitor in Nancy's life. Annie and her husband, Tommaso Cioni, were a regular woven-in presence. They checked in. They had dinner together. They were involved in the logistics of Nancy's daily life, in the way that adult children of aging parents often are. Managing the gap between a parent's desire for independence and the practical reality of what that independence requires. That closeness matters. It means Tommaso Cioni was not a peripheral figure in Nancy Guthrie's world. He was inside it, regularly, consistently, with full access to her home, her routines, her schedule, and the geography of her neighborhood. He knew which nights she was alone. He knew her medication schedule. He knew where she kept her phone. He knew when she went to bed and what time she woke up, and exactly how long it would take for someone to notice if she did not. That is not an accusation. That is a forensic observation. And it is the kind of observation that federal investigators do not make lightly and do not move past quickly. Because when the Pima County Sheriff's Department began to build its investigative response to Nancy's disappearance, the first question they asked was not who had a motive. The first question was simpler than that. More foundational. It was the question every serious investigation starts with. Who knew enough to do this? And the answer to that question, the forensic, documented, time-stamped answer, leads directly to the front door of the last person who saw Nancy Guthrie alive, the man who dropped her off, who watched the garage door close, who drove away into the dark. The investigation into Tommaso Cioni was about to begin, and it would not be subtle. In any criminal investigation, now there is a specific term for the person whose timeline places them closest to the victim at the moment everything went wrong. Law enforcement does not use dramatic language for this. They do not reach for loaded words. They use a clinical phrase, precise and deliberate. They call that person a person of interest. Tommaso Cioni became a person of interest the moment Nancy Guthrie's family called 911. Not because investigators had evidence against him at that point, not because anyone had accused him of anything, but because the forensic logic of this case pointed, immediately and unavoidably, to the last confirmed human contact Nancy had before she vanished. And that human contact had a name, it had a face, and it had a 10-digit phone number that the Pima County Sheriff's Department dialed within hours of receiving that missing person's call. His name was Tommaso Cioni, and his story, on its surface, was completely unremarkable. He is Italian-born, believed to be in his late 40s to early 50s. He came to the United States and built a life in Tucson, a city that does not rush, a city that rewards patience and quiet ambition in equal measure. He became an AP biology teacher at Basis Oro Valley, one of the highest-ranked charter schools in the state of Arizona. He had worked there for over 15 years. 15 years at the same school, in the same classroom, teaching the same subject to a new generation of students every year. That is not the biography of a man living on the edge. That is the biography of a man who chose stability, who planted himself in one place and stayed. He married Annie Guthrie, a poet, a jeweler, the daughter of the woman he would one day drive home from dinner on what would turn out to be the last normal night of her life. By all external appearances, theirs was a functional, engaged marriage. They were present in each other's lives. They were present in Nancy's life. The three of them spent time together regularly. Dinner, visits, the ordinary choreography of a close family operating in the same city. That ordinariness is exactly what made the forensic timeline so difficult to ignore. Because here is what that timeline says. At 9:48 p.m. on January 31st, 2026, Tommaso Cioni drove Nancy Guthrie home from his residence. He confirmed she was safely inside. The garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. He left. 4 hours and approximately 57 minutes later, a masked individual appeared on the doorbell camera of that same residence, manually disconnected the feed, and entered the home. The Bluetooth connection between Nancy's pacemaker and her iPhone, her only continuous real-time digital signal, severed at 2:28 a.m. And Nancy Guthrie was gone. Between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m., there is a window of approximately 4 hours. 4 hours during which Nancy was alone in that house. 4 hours during which nobody, as far as investigators can confirm, made contact with her. 4 hours that sit in the official record like a held breath. Now ask yourself something. You are building a case. You are a federal investigator with access to phone records, digital logs, location data, and a forensic timeline that has been verified down to the minute. And the last person to physically be with the victim left the property at 9:50 p.m. The crime occurred at 1:47 a.m. That person is married to the victim's daughter. That person has regular, unrestricted access to the victim's home and daily routine. That person knows the neighborhood. That person knows the layout of the house. That person knows the camera positions, the medication schedule, the nightly routine of an 84-year-old woman living alone. Where do you start? You start there, every time, without exception. The Pima County Sheriff's Department started there on February 1st, 2026. They made contact with Tommaso Cioni. They began the process of building a complete forensic picture of his movements, his communications, and his digital footprint in the hours surrounding Nancy's disappearance. And this was not a casual conversation over coffee. This was a systematic, methodical investigation conducted by a department that had already escalated the case to criminal status within 24 hours of the 911 call. And then came February 5th. 4 days after Nancy vanished, law enforcement arrived at the home of Tommaso Cioni and Annie Guthrie with a fully authorized search warrant. This was not a knock and a polite request to look around. Deputies arrived in number. They entered the property with purpose. They moved through the house wearing blue latex gloves, the standard protocol for evidence preservation, the physical signal that everything touched. Every surface, every drawer, every device in that home was now potentially part of a federal criminal record. They were inside for hours. The news cameras that had parked outside on the sidewalk captured every detail they could from the street. The footage ran nationally, and the internet, which had already been circling this case with the particular hunger of a community that believes it can solve things faster than trained investigators, erupted. Forums lit up. Side-by-side comparisons of Tommaso Cioni's physical profile against the grainy doorbell footage began circulating within hours. His height, his build, his posture, the facial hair visible at the edges of the mask the suspect was wearing. People were not speculating quietly. They were constructing verdicts in real time, out of pixels and assumptions, with the confidence of people who had never once sat inside a courtroom. But here is what those forums did not know, and here is what the breathless commentary on social media entirely missed. The search on February 5th was not the last one. 3 days later, on February 7th, law enforcement returned. A second search warrant, a second wave of deputies in blue gloves moving through the same house with the same methodical precision. And this time, when they walked out the front door, they were carrying something that made every investigative journalist covering this case stop mid-sentence: brown paper evidence bags, and a specialized silver forensic briefcase, the kind used by digital crime units to transport hard drives, laptops, and smartphones without compromising the data stored on them. The kind of case that says, without a single word, that someone's entire digital life is now in the custody of federal investigators. Tommaso Cioni's devices were gone. His digital history was in a forensic lab. And the question that had been quietly building since the moment Nancy disappeared was now loud enough for everyone to hear. What exactly did investigators think they were going to find? There is a moment in every high-profile investigation where the machinery of law enforcement stops being invisible, where the quiet, methodical work of detectives and forensic analysts suddenly breaks the surface and becomes something the entire country can see. A press conference, a perimeter tape, a convoy of marked vehicles pulling up to a residential address in broad daylight with cameras rolling on the sidewalk. For the Nancy Guthrie case, that moment came twice. February 5th was the first time. February 7th was the second. And between those two dates, something shifted in this investigation, something that the official record only partially explains, and that the forensic reality of what was seized from that house raises questions about that have never been fully answered in public. Let us walk through both searches precisely, because the details matter more than the optics. On February 5th, 2026, 4 days after Nancy Guthrie disappeared, the Pima County Sheriff's Department executed a search warrant at the Tucson residence of Tommaso Cioni and Annie Guthrie. The warrant had been reviewed and authorized by a judge, meaning investigators had already, within 4 days of Nancy's disappearance, assembled enough documented probable cause to convince a member of the judiciary that a search of this specific property was legally justified. That is not a small thing. Judges do not sign search warrants because law enforcement asks nicely. They sign them because investigators have presented articulable, documented reasons to believe that evidence of a crime may be found at that location. Deputies entered the home. Blue latex gloves. Systematic movement through the property. Photographs of every room, every surface, every item of potential evidentiary value. They spent hours inside. The news cameras were stationed on the sidewalk the entire time, and the footage that aired nationally that evening showed a house being treated not as the home of grieving family members, but as a potential crime scene. The internet did not wait for clarification. Within hours of that footage airing, online forums had already mapped Tommaso Cioni's publicly available photographs against the doorbell camera footage of the masked suspect. The height comparison, the build, the posture, the dark facial hair visible at the lower edge of the ski mask pressed against the suspect's jaw. People were running enhancement filters on screenshots. People were posting measurement overlays. The digital courtroom was already in session, and it had not bothered to hear any evidence before reaching its conclusions. Then came February 7th. 2 days after the first search, law enforcement returned to the same address with a second warrant. This one felt different from the moment it began. The deputies were back in their blue gloves, moving through the property again with the same systematic precision. But this time the duration was longer, the documentation more intensive, and what came out of the front door when they finally emerged told a very specific story. Brown paper evidence bags, multiple of them. Standard forensic packaging for physical items that need to be preserved without contamination. And then, the detail that shifted the entire national conversation about this case, a specialized silver forensic briefcase, the kind used exclusively by digital crime investigation units, the kind specifically designed to transport electronic devices, hard drives, laptops, tablets, smartphones, in a way that prevents any data from being remotely wiped, altered, or accessed during transit. Tommaso Cioni's digital life had just been placed into federal custody. Every text message, every email, every search query, every location ping from every device in that house, and every photograph, every deleted file, every application, every login, all of it, now in the hands of forensic analysts in a laboratory somewhere, being extracted, cataloged, and examined line by line. If there was anything in those devices that connected Tommaso Cioni to the events of February 1st, investigators were now in a position to find it. And then, 11 days after the second search, on February 16th, Sheriff Chris Nanos stood in front of a room full of cameras and said something that nobody in the national conversation had predicted. He cleared Tommaso Cioni, completely and categorically. He cleared Annie. He cleared every member of Nancy Guthrie's immediate family. He called them victims. He looked directly into those cameras and stated, without qualification, that the Guthrie family had been subjected to cruel and baseless public accusations while they were already enduring one of the most painful experiences of their lives. He asked the media, directly and pointedly, to do their jobs with accuracy and compassion. The internet went quiet for a few hours. Then it moved on to arguing about something else. But here is the question that the clearance does not answer. Here is the question that the forensic record of this investigation forces you to sit with, whether you are comfortable with it or not. If Tommaso Cioni and the Guthrie family were going to be cleared, if investigators had no evidence connecting them to Nancy's disappearance, then why did it take 2 separate search warrants, the seizure of multiple electronic devices, and 11 days of forensic laboratory analysis to arrive at that conclusion? The answer lies in a landmark 1995 United States Supreme Court case. Kiles versus Whitley. This ruling established a foundational principle in American criminal prosecution, that a defense attorney has the constitutional right to argue that law enforcement conducted a flawed or incomplete investigation. That if investigators ignored obvious leads, failed to examine the inner circle, or took shortcuts in the early stages of a case, a defense team can use that failure to cast doubt on the prosecution's entire case in front of a jury. The Pima County Sheriff's Department was not going to give any future defense attorney that opening. By executing 2 full search warrants, by seizing devices, by spending hours inside that house with gloves and evidence bags in full view of news cameras, by running those devices through a forensic laboratory for 11 days before issuing the clearance, they built a wall, a prosecutorial wall that no defense lawyer can climb. When the actual perpetrator of this crime is eventually identified and brought to trial, the Sheriff's Department can look at any jury in any courtroom and say, "We examined the family thoroughly, exhaustively, and with every forensic tool available to us. We left nothing unexamined. We cleared them completely." No defense attorney on earth can accuse them of ignoring the obvious. But here is what keeps coming back. Here is the question that the legal explanation does not fully satisfy. Those silver briefcases do not go to a forensic laboratory unless investigators believe, at the moment they are carrying them out, that something worth finding might be on those devices. So the question is not whether the searches were legally strategic. They clearly were. The question is what investigators saw, or thought they saw, in those first 11 days that made them look twice. And that answer has never been made public. There is a number at the center of this investigation, not a name, not a location, not a piece of physical evidence you can hold in your hand or photograph under a forensic light. A number, 41. And that number, when you understand exactly what it represents and exactly what it rules out, does more damage to the professional kidnapping narrative than any single piece of evidence recovered from that house. Let us build the timeline from the ground up, because the only way to understand why 41 minutes is so significant is to first understand what the digital record of that night actually looks like when you lay it flat and read it in sequence. At 9:48 p.m. on January 31st, 2026, Tommaso Cioni pulls up to Nancy Guthrie's residence in the Catalina foothills. He confirms she is inside. At 9:50 p.m., the garage door closes. That timestamp is not an estimate. It is not a neighbor's recollection. It is a digitally recorded event, logged by the garage door's own operational system. 9:50 p.m., garage closed, Nancy inside, the property secure. The next several hours produce nothing. No motion alerts, no camera triggers, no digital disturbances of any kind. The house sits quiet through the late evening, through midnight, through the early hours of the morning when the Catalina foothills neighborhood is at its most still. The desert presses in from all sides. The street is empty. At approximately 2:12 a.m., a motion sensor connected to the doorbell camera system registers activity near the front of the property. This is the first digital signal that something is approaching the house. The camera begins recording, and at 1:47 a.m., according to the forensic timestamp extracted from the camera system's back-end data after the recording device itself was physically removed, a figure enters the frame, approaches the lens, and manually disconnects the feed. The camera dies. And now the house is dark in every sense. No recording, no visual evidence, no digital eyes, just the interior of a single-story home in the foothills and whatever is happening inside it. At 2:28 a.m., the Bluetooth monitoring application on Nancy Guthrie's iPhone registers a disconnect. The signal between her pacemaker and her phone, the signal that had been transmitting her cardiac data continuously and without interruption throughout the entire evening, breaks. The app logs the timestamp automatically. 2:28 a.m. Connection lost. From 1:47 a.m. to 2:28 a.m., 41 minutes. Now, here is why that number dismantles everything. In a professional abduction scenario, the scenario that every major news outlet was pushing in the first 72 hours of this case, speed is not a preference. It is the entire operational foundation. A professional team operating against a non-resistant, mobility-limited target does not browse, does not linger, does not take its time. The objective is singular: breach, locate, extract, disappear. The entire sequence, against a target who cannot run and cannot physically resist, should take no more than 3 to 5 minutes from the moment of entry to the moment the vehicle clears the street. That is not a theory. That is the operational reality of how targeted abductions function. Every documented case, every forensic study, every behavioral analysis conducted by the FBI's Violent Crime Unit points to the same conclusion. Speed is survival. Every additional minute inside a residential property is another minute of exposure, another minute for a motion sensor to trigger somewhere on the block, and another minute for a light to come on in a neighbor's upstairs window, another minute for something to go wrong in a way that cannot be controlled. This person stayed for 41 minutes. Think about what 41 minutes actually feels like inside a darkened house. It is not a brief moment. It is not a quick scan of the room. 41 minutes is enough time to methodically move through every room in an average-sized single-story home. Twice. It is enough time to search drawers, open closets, go through documents, locate and examine a safe. It is enough time to cook a full meal. It is enough time, if something went wrong the moment that door opened, to spend the bulk of that window reacting to a situation that was not part of the plan. That last possibility is the one that investigators keep returning to. The 3 theories have emerged from the forensic analysis of this timeline. The first is coordination. The person inside the house was waiting for a signal. A second party, a vehicle that had not yet arrived, a confirmation that the route was clear. If this was a multi-person operation, the 41-minute gap could represent a holding pattern, someone waiting inside with Nancy until the external logistics were in place. The second theory is search. The person was not there primarily for Nancy. They were there for something else. Documents, a safe, cash, a specific item that required time to locate in a darkened house using only the available light. Nancy, in this theory, was a secondary objective, or a complication. The third theory is the one that federal investigators have been most reluctant to discuss publicly. And it is the theory that the physical evidence recovered from the front entrance of that home points toward most directly. The plan did not survive contact with the reality of what was inside that house. Something went wrong in the first moments after entry. And those 41 minutes were not operational time. They were not waiting time. They were reactive time. The time it takes to manage a situation that has already moved outside the boundaries of what was planned. Now, combine that theory with this forensic detail. The biological traces recovered from the front entrance of Nancy's home, confirmed by laboratory analysis as belonging to Nancy Guthrie, were located at the threshold, not deep inside the property, at the entrance. The point of first contact between whatever was waiting inside that house and whoever came through that door. And that location matters enormously, because it tells investigators that whatever the physical sequence of events was on the night of February 1st, the critical moment did not happen in a back bedroom or a hallway deeper inside the house. It happened at the front, immediately, within the first seconds of entry. That is not the signature of an abduction that went according to plan. That is the signature of an abduction that encountered something unexpected the moment it began. And the 41 minutes that followed are not the 41 minutes of a professional operation executing smoothly. They are the 41 minutes of someone inside a dark house, alone, managing the consequences of something that should not have happened the way it did. Ask yourself this. You are Tommaso Cioni. It is 9:50 p.m. You have just watched the garage door close behind your mother-in-law. You know her routine. You know her medication schedule. You know exactly where her phone is, exactly what it monitors, and exactly what timestamp it will record when the Bluetooth signal breaks. You know the camera positions. You know the neighborhood. If you were going to send someone to that house in the middle of the night, what time would you tell them to arrive? And how long would you tell them they had before the digital record of that house started telling a story you could not control? 4 hours and 17 minutes after that garage door closed, someone arrived. That is not a coincidence. That is a calculation. And the person with the most complete information needed to make that calculation, the person who knew every variable, every timestamp, or every digital tripwire in that house, had driven away from the property at 9:50 p.m. with all of it already in his head. On February 10th, 2026, the FBI released doorbell camera footage to the public. Not the original recording that had been physically removed from the device on the night of February 1st, carried out of the house along with whatever else left through that front door during the 41-minute window. What the FBI released was recovered from the back-end residual data of the camera system itself. Fragments, partial frames, enough to construct a sequence, enough to show the world what investigators had been studying, frame by frame, since the earliest hours of this case. The footage is grainy. It is low resolution in the way that residential doorbell cameras almost always are. Functional enough to confirm presence, on too degraded to confirm identity. But grainy footage is not useless footage. Not to a trained behavioral analyst, not to the FBI profilers and criminal psychologists who had been sitting with this material since February 1st, running it through enhancement software, slowing it down, isolating individual frames, and doing what they are specifically trained to do. They were not looking for a face. They were looking for behavior. And what they found in that footage, what the behavioral analysis of those recovered frames revealed about the person standing on Nancy Guthrie's porch at 1:47 in the morning, did not look like the profile of a professional. It looked like something else entirely. Something more personal. Something more calculated in the wrong direction. Something that, the more you examine it points with increasing specificity toward a person who was not experienced at this, but who had spent a significant amount of time preparing for it. Let us start with the clothing, because the clothing alone is extraordinary. The suspect is visibly wearing multiple layers of heavy garments stacked directly on top of one another. This is not the practical layering of someone dressed for cold weather. The Tucson desert in February drops to the low 40s overnight, cold enough for a jacket, not cold enough for the kind of deliberate, excessive bulk this figure is carrying. The layers are thick. They are structured. They create a silhouette that is artificially widened, deliberately distorted, designed to obscure the natural lines of the body underneath, the shoulder width, the torso shape, the arm length, or every physical characteristic that a forensic analyst would use to build a body measurement profile has been buried under fabric. That is not improvised. That is planned. He is wearing a ski mask. That is expected. Any individual with basic awareness of forensic evidence conceals their face. But look closer at the footage. Behavioral analysts noted what appears to be a second layer of face covering beneath the ski mask. Additional material pressed against the skin, providing a secondary barrier between the face and any surface that might collect biological trace material. 2 layers, over the face and the hands. He is wearing 2 pairs of gloves, layered directly on top of each other. Now think carefully about what your hands need to do in a situation like this. You need to disconnect a camera, a task requiring enough dexterity to locate a specific cable or button on a small device mounted above a door frame. You need to breach or unlock an entry point. You need to manage a human being. Your hands, in this scenario, are your primary operational tools. They need to be precise. They need to respond quickly. They need fine motor control. 2 pairs of gloves destroys fine motor control. The outer layer reduces tactile sensitivity to near 0. The combination turns capable hands into something clumsy, imprecise, and slow. No professional criminal doubles their gloves. 1 pair handles the forensic requirement. The second pair is not a professional precaution. It is a pathological one. And that distinction, professional versus pathological, is exactly what behavioral analysts flagged when they reviewed this footage. A professional criminal layers their precautions to the point of operational efficiency and stops there. 2 masks, 2 pairs of gloves, multiple clothing layers designed to alter body shape. These are not the precautions of someone who has done this before and knows exactly how much coverage is enough. These are the precautions of someone who is terrified, specifically and personally terrified of being connected to this location, this victim, and this crime. That level of terror does not come from a general fear of getting caught. Career criminals have a general fear of getting caught. It is managed, it is calculated, it becomes routine. This level of terror comes from proximity, from knowing that the investigators who will work this case are going to look first at the people closest to the victim, from knowing that a single fiber, a single partial print, a single microscopic biological trace is enough to place you not just at a crime scene, but in a specific relationship to the victim lying at the center of it. You do not wear 2 pairs of gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. You wear 2 pairs of gloves because you know that the person who will be asked about fingerprints first is you. Then there is the firearm. The suspect has a handgun pushed into the front waistband of his pants. No holster, no retention device of any kind. In the firearms and tactical community, carrying a weapon in the front waistband without a holster is not a method. It is an accident waiting to happen. It is unstable, dangerous to the carrier, and completely inconsistent with anyone who has received any formal firearms training. Officers carry in holsters. Security professionals carry in holsters. Even experienced criminal operators carry in holsters, because a weapon that shifts, falls, or discharges at the wrong moment ends an operation faster than any investigator could. This weapon is just pushed in, loose, angled, uncomfortable. That is not the firearm carry of a professional. That is the firearm carry of someone who obtained a weapon specifically for this night and had no prior experience carrying one concealed. Someone for whom the gun was a prop as much as a tool, something to project control rather than something they knew how to use with any efficiency. FBI behavioral analysts reviewing this footage reached a conclusion that shifted the entire investigative direction of this case. The person on that porch was not a hired professional, was not an experienced criminal operator, or was not someone who had done anything remotely like this before. The person on that porch was someone acting out of personal motivation, someone with a specific reason to be at that specific house, on that specific night, with that specific target. Someone who knew Nancy Guthrie. And the name that sat at the top of every investigator's list of people who knew Nancy Guthrie, the name that the forensic timeline, the digital evidence, the behavioral analysis, and the 2 search warrants all pointed back toward, had not changed since the moment this investigation began. Coming up, the ransom demands that were never meant to succeed. The financial architecture of a kidnapping built not to collect money, but to create a story. And the detail buried inside those demands that federal investigators say told them, within 48 hours, exactly what kind of operation this actually was. Every ransom demand in the history of documented kidnapping cases has one thing in common: one structural requirement that defines the entire operation and separates a real extortion from everything else. That requirement is follow-through. A kidnapper who wants money maintains contact. They set a deadline and they enforce it. They provide proof that the person they are holding is alive. They respond when that proof is requested. They negotiate. They push. They stay in the conversation because the conversation is the only leverage they have. Silence is not a negotiating tactic. Silence is a structural failure, or it is a deliberate design. In the Nancy Guthrie case, the ransom demands that surfaced in the days following her disappearance were, on the surface, exactly what you would expect from a high-profile kidnapping. Large figures, cryptocurrency, deadlines, the vocabulary of a serious criminal operation demanding serious money from a family with a serious public profile. Savannah Guthrie is one of the most recognizable faces in American television news. The assumption, the one the headlines ran with immediately, was that Nancy had been taken precisely because of that connection. That this was a calculated professional extraction designed to exploit a famous daughter's resources. But when federal investigators sat down with the actual structure of those demands, not the surface language, not the dollar figures, but the operational mechanics underneath, what they found did not look like a professional ransom operation. It looked like theater. And the first demands arrived in the days immediately following Nancy's disappearance. Cryptocurrency transfers, figures in the millions, instructions that were vague where they should have been specific, and specific where they should have been flexible. A real ransom operation is a negotiation. It has room built into it, room for the family to respond, to ask questions, to request verification, to begin the process of moving money through channels that take time to navigate. A professional kidnapper builds that room deliberately because they need the family functional and cooperative. A panicked, grieving family that cannot think clearly cannot access millions of dollars in cryptocurrency. These demands did not build that room. Then the deadlines arrived. And then the deadlines passed. No follow-up contact, no response to the family's attempts to engage, no proof of life provided at any point, not a voice recording, not a photograph, not a single verifiable signal that Nancy Guthrie was alive and in the custody of whoever was sending these messages. In a genuine kidnapping, proof of life is not optional. It is the foundational transaction of the entire operation. The kidnapper proves the victim is alive. The family confirms the proof. The negotiation continues. Without proof of life, there is no negotiation. There is nothing. No proof of life was ever provided. On February 7th, Savannah Guthrie released a video statement that was watched by millions of people within hours of posting. She looked directly into the camera, her voice controlled, her words precise, and she said what any daughter in her position would say. The family would pay, and they wanted their mother back. They were asking whoever had Nancy to make contact. The response was silence. A demand then surfaced, carrying a figure of $6 million and a deadline of February 9th. The family was ready to engage. Investigators were monitoring every channel. Every digital pathway that could carry a response was being watched. February 9th arrived. The deadline passed without a single word from whoever had sent it. Now, here is where the investigation made a turn that the public largely missed. Because on February 5th, the same day as the first search warrant at Tommaso Cioni's residence, federal authorities in California arrested a man on charges of making fraudulent ransom demands to the Guthrie family. This individual had no connection to Nancy's actual disappearance, and he was an opportunist who had seen the story on the news, identified a grieving high-profile family, and constructed a fraudulent extortion scheme designed to extract money from people who were desperate enough to pay anything to get their mother back. He was arrested. He was charged. And his arrest clarified something important. Not all of the demands that reached the Guthrie family came from the same source. Some of them were fabrications. Criminal noise layered on top of an already complex investigation, muddying the signal, making it harder for investigators to identify which communications, if any, were genuine. But here is what that California arrest did not explain. It did not account for the structural failures of the demands that federal investigators believed were connected to the actual case. The missing proof of life. See the deadlines that passed in silence. The absence of any follow-up contact after the $6 million demand evaporated without a response. Federal investigators reached a conclusion about those specific demands that has never been publicly stated in full. But the outline of that conclusion is visible in the forensic record if you know what to look for. The demands connected to this case were not designed to result in a financial transaction. They were not built to collect money. They were built to look like they were built to collect money. There is a fundamental difference between those two things, and that difference tells you something specific about who constructed them. A professional kidnapper builds a demand to succeed, to close, to result in a transfer. Someone staging a kidnapping builds a demand to be seen, so to create a narrative, to point investigators in a direction, to buy time. And the person with the most to gain from investigators spending their first critical days chasing cryptocurrency transactions and missed deadlines rather than examining a forensic timeline and a 41-minute gap, that person did not need the ransom to succeed. They needed it to exist. Every crime scene tells two stories. The first story is the one the perpetrator intended to leave behind. The carefully constructed narrative of physical evidence, staged and positioned and arranged to direct investigators toward a specific conclusion. The second story is the one the perpetrator did not intend to leave behind. The microscopic, the accidental, the biological. The story that gets told not by what was placed, but by what was shed. Without awareness, without control, and without the ability to go back and erase it. In the Nancy Guthrie case, the second story was written in DNA. From the earliest hours of the investigation, the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI forensic teams working the crime scene at Nancy's Catalina Foothills residence were collecting biological material, swabbing surfaces, bagging items, processing the front entrance, the interior threshold. Every point of contact that the forensic timeline suggested had been active during the 41-minute window. The biological traces recovered from the front entrance, confirmed as belonging to Nancy, had already established that the critical sequence of events began at the threshold of that home, not deeper inside it. But investigators were looking for something beyond Nancy's own biological material, and they were looking for whoever had been in that house with her. And approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's residence, they found a glove. A single glove, discarded. left behind in the way that items are left behind when someone is moving quickly, when the adrenaline of what just happened is still running hot, and the priority is distance rather than cleanup. The glove was collected, packaged, and sent to the forensic laboratory. DNA was extracted from the interior lining, the surface that had been in direct contact with the skin of whoever wore it. The profile was run through CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's national forensic database containing DNA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and forensic evidence collected from crime scenes across the country. See if the person who wore that glove had any prior interaction with the criminal justice system at the federal or state level. CODIS would find them. CODIS returned no match. The profile did not belong to anyone in the database. Whoever wore that glove had no prior criminal record that had generated a DNA sample. They were, in the language of forensic investigators, a forensic unknown, present in the evidence, absent from the system. Investigators then initiated a process called investigative genetic genealogy. This is the same methodology that cracked the Golden State Killer case in 2018. The technique that takes an unknown DNA profile and traces it not through criminal databases, but through publicly available genealogical databases, ancestry platforms, family tree submissions, and the vast digital record of people who have voluntarily submitted their own genetic material to trace their heritage. By identifying distant relatives of the unknown profile, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who share enough genetic markers to establish a family connection. Investigators can build a family tree outward and then narrow it back down to identify the specific individual the DNA belongs to. That process, in the Nancy Guthrie case, eventually produced a lead. The DNA from the glove was traced to an individual connected to a local restaurant, a worker, someone with no apparent connection to Nancy Guthrie, no apparent connection to Tommaso Cioni, no apparent connection to the Guthrie family at any level that investigators could initially identify. The sheriff confirmed this publicly. So he confirmed the restaurant connection. He confirmed that the individual had been located and interviewed. And then he confirmed something that added an entirely new layer of complexity to an already complicated forensic picture. The DNA on that glove was not a clean, single-contributor profile. It was mixed, meaning more than one person's biological material was present on that glove's interior surface. The primary contributor had been traced to the restaurant worker. But the secondary contributor, the additional biological material woven into that same sample, had not been successfully resolved into a complete, identifiable profile. Mixed DNA samples are among the most technically demanding challenges in forensic science. When two or more contributors are present in the same biological sample, the process of separating those profiles, of pulling each individual genetic signature cleanly out of the combined material, requires a level of laboratory analysis that takes significant time and does not always produce a clean result. So the secondary profile in the glove sample had not yet yielded a complete identification as of the most recent public statements from investigators. But the glove was not the only item recovered in the surrounding area. In the days following Nancy's disappearance, search teams combing the neighborhood and surrounding streets recovered a total of 16 pairs of gloves. 16. Spread across the area in a radius that suggested either a significant amount of material had been shed during the suspect's departure route, or that search team members themselves had discarded protective gloves during the ground search operation, contaminating the evidentiary landscape in ways that made clean analysis significantly more difficult. Investigators confirmed that the majority of those 16 pairs were traced to search and rescue personnel. A standard issue, accounted for. But the word majority is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, because majority means not all. and the gloves that were not accounted for by search team records remained in the forensic queue, awaiting analysis. Then there was the car. A neighbor's Ring camera, located approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's residence, captured footage of a vehicle moving through the area at 2:36 a.m. on February 1st, 8 minutes after the pacemaker Bluetooth disconnect logged at 2:28 a.m. The vehicle's make, model, and registration have not been publicly confirmed by investigators. Its presence in that corridor at that specific time has not been explained. And as of the most recent public statements from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, that vehicle remains unidentified. The DNA from the glove on the mixed secondary profile. The 16 pairs recovered from the search area. The unidentified vehicle moving through the neighborhood 8 minutes after the pacemaker went silent. Each of these details, examined individually, is a thread. A single line of inquiry that may or may not lead somewhere definitive. But pull all of them at the same time, and the picture they form is not of a professional operation that disappeared cleanly into the night. It is of a person who left in a hurry, who shed material, who was not as covered as the double gloves and the double mask and the layered clothing were supposed to guarantee. Someone who prepared extensively and still left a trail. 6 weeks. That is how long Nancy Guthrie has been missing as of today, March 15th, 2026. 6 weeks since the garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. 6 weeks since the camera went dark at 1:47 a.m. 6 weeks since the pacemaker app logged its final timestamp, and the Bluetooth signal between a daughter's monitoring device and her mother's heartbeat went permanently silent. 6 weeks, and no arrest. In the architecture of a major federal criminal investigation, 6 weeks is not an eternity. Complex cases take time. Forensic laboratory analysis takes time. Investigative genetic genealogy takes time. The careful, methodical construction of a prosecutable case, one that will survive the scrutiny of a defense attorney and hold together in front of a jury, takes time. Investigators will tell you this. They will tell you it every time a reporter pushes a microphone toward their face and asks why nobody has been charged yet. But 6 weeks in a missing persons case is different. And because every day that passes without a resolution is another day that physical evidence degrades, that witnesses' memories shift, that digital trails go colder, that the window of finding Nancy Guthrie alive, a window that many investigators privately acknowledged was narrow from the beginning, closes further. Sheriff Chris Nanos has been the public face of this investigation from day one. He has stood at that podium through press conference after press conference, fielding questions from reporters who want answers that the investigation has not yet produced. And what he has said at those press conferences, when you strip away the careful language and read the forensic subtext, tells a specific story about exactly where this case stands. He has said that investigators believe they know why Nancy was targeted, not who. Why? That distinction is significant. Knowing the motive of a crime before identifying the perpetrator means investigators have built a profile of this operation from the inside out. They understand the logic of it. They understand what the perpetrator wanted and why they wanted it. What they have not yet been able to do, or have not yet been willing to say publicly, is connect that motive to a specific name with enough documented evidence to support an arrest. He has said that he believes the perpetrator could strike again. That statement is not made casually. A sheriff does not stand in front of cameras and warn the public that an unidentified individual poses an ongoing threat unless investigators have a specific reason to believe that threat is real. That warning tells us something about the profile they have built. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was not random. This was targeted, calculated, and executed by someone who had a reason, a specific, identifiable reason, to choose Nancy Guthrie and no one else. He has said that the investigation is making progress, that investigators are, in his words, definitely closer than they were. He has said this repeatedly, across multiple press conferences, with the measured confidence of a man who is trying to hold two things together simultaneously: the integrity of an active investigation and the patience of a public that is running out of it. The FBI, meanwhile, shifted its command post operations from Tucson to Phoenix in the weeks following the initial ground search phase. Some analysts read that relocation as a signal that the active, physical search component of the investigation has wound down, that the case has transitioned from a search operation to a forensic and intelligence operation being run from a distance. The FBI pushed back on that interpretation. Investigators insisted the case remained active and fully resourced. A combined reward of $1.2 million has been assembled, drawn from contributions by the Guthrie family, Pima County, and additional donors who followed the case publicly. That reward has generated tens of thousands of tips. Every one of them has to be processed, evaluated, cross-referenced against the forensic record, and either incorporated into the investigative picture or eliminated. That is not a fast process. That is months of analytical work compressed into weeks by a team that is already carrying the full weight of a federal criminal investigation. 2 individuals were detained and questioned in the weeks following Nancy's disappearance. Both were released without charge. Neither has been publicly identified. Neither has been named as a suspect. And the DNA, the mixed profile from the glove, the unresolved secondary contributor, the investigative genetic genealogy process still running in the background of a forensic laboratory somewhere, remains the most viable open thread in the entire case. Sheriff Nanos said it himself on the record in front of cameras. That DNA, he stated, is going to get us to somebody. The question is when. And the question underneath that one, the question that has been present in this investigation since the moment the camera went dark on February 1st, is whether the somebody that DNA leads to is a stranger, or someone Nancy Guthrie already knew. Here is what we know, not what we suspect, not what the forums are saying, not what the headlines chose to emphasize in those first breathless 72 hours when the story was new and the facts were still being established. What the verified, documented, forensically confirmed record of this investigation actually tells us. Tommaso Cioni dropped Nancy Guthrie home at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, 2026. He was the last known person to see her alive. 4 hours and 57 minutes later, a masked individual with no professional operational profile, carrying an unsecured firearm and wearing 2 pairs of gloves over 2 layers of face covering, manually disconnected the doorbell camera at her residence and entered the home. The pacemaker Bluetooth signal severed at 2:28 a.m., 41 minutes after that camera went dark. Biological traces belonging to Nancy were recovered from the front entrance. A glove was found 2 miles away, containing mixed DNA that has not been fully resolved. A vehicle moved through the area 8 minutes after the pacemaker went silent and has never been identified. The ransom demands that followed carried no proof of life, met no deadlines, and produced no contact after the final figure of $6 million was issued and ignored. Every thread in this investigation, pulled far enough, returns to the same questions. Who knew Nancy's routine well enough to plan around it? Who knew the camera positions? Who knew the medication schedule? Who knew that a pacemaker app on a nightstand phone was logging cardiac data in real time and understood exactly what timestamp that app would record when the signal broke. Tommaso Cioni has not been charged. He has not been publicly named as a suspect. The Pima County Sheriff's Department cleared him and his family on February 16, 2026, and that clearance stands as part of the official record. Nothing in this investigation, as it currently exists in the public domain, constitutes legal evidence of his involvement. But the forensic record does not clear him of proximity. It does not clear him of knowledge. It does not clear him of being the person who understood that house, that woman, and that night better than anyone else who has come under investigative scrutiny in the 6 weeks since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. The case is open. The DNA is in the laboratory. The reward stands at $1.2 million. The FBI tip line, 1-800-CALL-FBI, remains active. And somewhere in Tucson, Arizona, in a forensic file that has not yet been fully read, is the answer to the question that has been sitting at the center of this investigation since the moment a garage door rolled shut at 9:50 p.m. and a son-in-law drove away into the night. Nancy Guthrie deserves that answer. Her family deserves it. And the forensic record of this case, piece by piece, is moving toward it. Now it is your turn. You have heard all 5 forensic anomalies: the 41-minute gap, the ransom built to fail, the biological traces at the threshold, and the behavioral profile of someone acting from personal motivation, the DNA trail that has not yet reached its end. If you were the lead investigator on this case, which of those 5 details would you pull on first? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Because this community has been right before. And cases like this one get solved when enough people are paying close enough attention. If this investigation gave you something to think about, share this video with one person today. One person who follows true crime. One person who pays attention. Because Nancy Guthrie's story is not over. And the more people who know the details of this case, the real details, the forensic details, not the headline version, the harder it becomes for the truth to stay buried. Subscribe to the Case Files Collective if you are not already part of this community. Turn on your notifications. We will be here when this case breaks. And when it does, we will walk through every piece of it. The same way we walked through this one. Methodically, forensically, without flinching. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 6 weeks. She was 84 years old. She had a pacemaker connected to a phone on her nightstand. She went home on a Thursday evening and never came back. And the person who knows exactly what happened inside that house during those 41 minutes of silence is still out there. That is not a theory. That is what the evidence says.